So if I wrote on a napkin, this napkin is consistent because it's on the napkin and it's the consistency of the napkin. Does that mean that it's true, sir, because it's written consistently? No.
You're not listening.
I am listening.
No, you're not.
You keep giving us like very misleading
I did
arguments.
not say if you write on a napkin or if you write on a piece of
No,
paper
what I'm saying,
something.
you're arguing that
We had four
consistency
different
inside of
authors,
itself.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When you read those four unique, different accounts
That
of
have been
Christ,
translated together
there are
from
no
manuscripts
contradictions.
as evidence for these things. You haven't presented any historical evidence about the resurrection besides the Bible right now. So why should I believe you?
All right, the question is, are the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John historically reliable or not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Well, how do you determine whether any document is historically reliable or not? In other words, what
Comparison.
tests?
Comparison.
What do you mean?
Side-by-side comparison of the events that they laid out and in that order, what contradictions they have in there and what they don't.
Good. That's one of my tests. Internal consistency.
Yes, sir.
And so I'm real glad that we don't just have one gospel. We have four different unique eyewitness accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Four different accounts. We can compare them and contrast them, and we can ask ourselves,
It's mostly contrast, though, no comparison.
are there contradictions within the Gospels that point to massive confusion on the part of the authors?
Yes.
No.
Or
There's a
44,000
tremendous-
denominations would consider you incorrect, sir.
Sir, that doesn't have anything to do with the price of tea in China or anything else.
Yes, it does.
Just because this
You're
guy
talking about
disagrees with
denominations
me
from your
doesn't mean I'm wrong or that I'm right.
It does.
No, you got to go to the evidence. Just because people disagree tells you nothing about the
We're
facts.
talking about the consistency. If they disagree on what is in there, there is nothing in there that is consistent. They are inconsistent about how they interpret it. Therefore, what's in there is inconsistent.
No. The Gospels, or any document that's written, be it the Quran or the Bhagavad
It's
Gita,
inconsistent as well.
you have to respect and you have to interpret it. But you can't just pull stuff out and cut stuff away. You have to deal with what's there. And no denomination has the right to say, we're going to just rip stuff out and then X other stuff out. It's not intellectually honest. People do it.
So we should be stoning people.
No,
says to
Jesus
in the
never
Bible.
said to stone people.
He came to uphold the law, not to abolish it. So therefore, the Old Testament is still upheld by your standards of not tossing things out.
Correct.
Yes, sir. Correct.
So you've got to read in context, and it's real clear that the Mosaic Law was designed for a theocracy. The Jewish
Jesus came to
people,
uphold that theocracy. He said so himself.
and in that theocracy, there were horrible practices like polygamy.
Mandated
Now, the
by God.
Mosaic Law does not outlaw polygamy. But when you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, and it's real clear, God never intended polygamy. All right, so what do you think about Jesus Christ?
Fictional character, possibly a real man, but there's plenty of messiahs back in that time that we know of. Historically,
Fictional
sir.
character? Jesus of Nazareth?
Yes.
What year do we live in?
2013 right now, sir.
2013 after what?
After somebody decided to change the time because they thought that there was something out there.
We live in the year 2013 because Jesus Christ is an historical person who was born, and we mark our calendar by his birth.
Mayans
So
had a
please
fucking
don't stand
calendar.
out here and act like, oh shoot,
Does that
maybe
mean that-
Jesus didn't never exist. Come on, buddy, let's
Because
be
Mayans had a
honest.
calendar, then their myths were real, sir?
Jesus Christ was an historical person who lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead. That's history. That's not mythology. We mark our calendar according to his birth. So come on,
So what? The
think.
new calendar, then that doesn't apply anymore. So is it true then because of no calendar, or is it false because of no calendar? Those aren't
No,
arguments.
I'm just trying
Those
to
are
point
just
out to you
misleading,
how
misdirection.
illogical you're being when you say Jesus didn't exist.
No, I'm saying
That's
the
illogical.
fictional character of the Bible, that person that performed miracles, is way too much for anything to ever have happened. There might have been somebody that was back there that went to certain places and did preach about peace, but there was nothing mystical or divine about it.
All right, fine. But the point is, he was an historical person who really lived.
Maybe
Agreed?
not even by the name Jesus, maybe by Messiah. And there was
right.
plenty of them. So it could have been just a combination of many people named Messiah that contributed to this myth that you're talking
Okay.
about.
So how do you determine whether a document is historically reliable or not?
Evidence like that we have of a Caesar or something like that.
Okay,
Something
what
that's-
evidence do we have of a Caesar that convinces you Caesar lived?
Okay, well, we have statues that are physical representations of that actual person.
Statues?
We have, We have buildings, we have paintings, we have pottery.
We have statues of Zeus.
We have multiple
Does that mean Zeus
documents
lived?
from multiple historians.
Multiple historians. Good. There we go. I don't believe Caesar existed because there's a statue of Caesar. There's statues of Zeus. There's statues
what I'm
of.
saying, the combination of all that evidence there.
So I don't trust statues to tell me who existed or not. What I trust is eyewitness testimony. People saw George Washington be inaugurated first president of the United States. That is historical knowledge based on the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony.
You don't base 2,000-year-old evidence on eyewitness stuff. That has to be physical artifacts, sir. Things that were like George Washington 200 years ago is a huge difference. Huge difference, especially with the technology we have to record that information. And the fact that other people recorded that disliked Washington is evidence that he did exist as a person, and it takes away that myth that backs him up. The people that believed in Jesus Christ and wrote about him were writing about him as a fictional character. They were all about him specifically. There's no contradiction except for maybe in the Quran where he's just a prophet. And if you take all that and you divide it up and you kind of look at it, he could have possibly existed as a man that had some good beliefs, but other than that, it's been exaggerated.
All right, excuse me, ma'am. So what is your point? What is your point about Jesus Christ? Do you think he lived or not?
You can't say for sure. What I think it is there's a majority of, there's a bunch of messiahs. If you go over to the Middle East right now, which I've been, okay, there's messiahs over there right now trying to tell you that they know who God is. Yeah, and that's exactly what was happening back then. There's multiple people doing it.
But now, how did Jesus live his life? So Jesus made some incredible claims.
You're still talking about one person. I think it was a majority. I think personally it was multiple messiahs, and that they took all those different stories, compiled it to benefit themselves in controlling people like you right now.
Like I'm controlling people?
Listen to him.
I'm controlling people?
No. What I'm saying is raising people up through the doctrine is controlling them in that sort of manner, sir.
Fine. But we're here having an open-minded discussion, and nobody has to be here, right? You're here because you choose to be.
Because it's America, not because of your religion, sir.
Fine. But reality is people are here because they choose to be, not because they have to be.
Yeah.
All right? Now, the reason that I trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to give me accurate historical information is because, first of all, the internal harmony. 4 different eyewitness accounts, no contradictions, internal consistency.
Wrong. Side-by-side comparison, you can do it yourself. There's tons of internal contradictions, especially if you do it on...
Give me one.
I can't name them off.
How unfortunate.
Okay, oh no, I got one. I just remember one. Sorry, it's hard to do off the top of my head. Matthew it didn't end the book with the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
He didn't?
No. The oldest text that we have do not have that in there. The rest of them do. Seems like a very important thing to have.
That's a very interesting point. The only problem is you got it wrong. It's not Matthew, it's Mark you're talking about. The end of Mark is not in the earliest Greek manuscripts, not Matthew. Okay, so let's try and keep our facts straight.
Okay, my bad. It's a name.
It's all right.
I don't
so
do
it's the
this
Gospel
right
of Mark,
job,
you're
obviously.
right. The end of the Gospel of Mark is not in some of the earliest Greek manuscripts. But sir, before that questionable ending of Mark, the tomb of Jesus Christ is empty. The resurrection is clearly taught in the Gospel of Mark. The resurrection appearances are not recorded in the earliest form of Mark, but the empty tomb is right there.
Okay, so
you do not have a dead Christ at the end of Mark. You have a resurrected Christ at the end of Mark. So the Gospels are totally consistent. Jesus lived a sinless life. He taught amazing ethical teachings. He died on a cross to forgive us for our sin, and he rose from the dead.
He could have sinned there. There's plenty of room in there for him to have sinned.
Fascinating point. You're right. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not playmates with Christ at the age of 12, 13, and 10.
Yeah.
But they lived with Christ for 3 years. And in those 3 years, they observed that Christ never sinned once.
Not once.
Not once. In fact, in John chapter 8, Jesus could look into the faces of his enemies and say, "Which one of you can prove me guilty of sin?" And his enemies were silent. So the overwhelming evidence is Christ lived a magnificent life.
Okay, so that's not evidence. That's hearsay from a book that you still have yet to validate, sir.
All right, so the first piece of evidence that the Gospels are reliable is internal consistency. The second piece of evidence that the Gospels are reliable is literary style.
So if I wrote on a napkin, this napkin is consistent because it's on the napkin and it's the consistency of the napkin. Does that mean that it's true, sir, because it's written consistently? No.
You're not listening.
I am listening.
No, you're not.
You keep giving us like very misleading
I did not
arguments.
say if you write on a napkin or if you write on a piece of
No, what
paper
I'm saying, you're
something,
arguing the
we had
consistency
4
inside
different
of
authors,
itself.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When you read those 4 unique, different accounts
That have
of
been translated
Christ,
together for
there
the
are
past
no
2 days.
contradictions.
Over the past-
There's an internal consistency. That is what I said.
There's
Now
not.
please get the wax out of your ears and listen.
There's not.
And then
I'm only
respond
deaf
to what I
because I'm a veteran,
say.
so I might be hard
Don't
of hearing,
respond
but
to what I
that's
don't
none of
say.
your concern.
Respond to what I say. I respond to what you say.
Yeah.
Now respond to what I say, which
am.
means you got to listen.
Doing it.
So listen.
I'm listening.
All right. Third test. When any document claims to be historically reliable is archaeology.
Yes.
Does archaeology validate Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Nazareth?
No, it doesn't. No historical record
Okay,
of Nazareth
how
being
does it
there
not?
when historically Jesus should have been there.
Pardon?
There's no historical evidence of Nazareth being there when historically when Jesus
Yes,
was
there
there.
is.
There's not.
Well, I'm sorry. I had to study that because a student at UCSB challenged me on that. I had to go back and clearly farm tools, inscriptions in caves show that Nazareth was a very small town in the 1st century AD. Crystal clearly, archaeology
So what
shows
are you
that.
using? You're using carbon dating to verify when exactly that was, sir? We're using technology to do that?
We're using archaeology, and we're using
What are you
inscriptions
using to
in
date it, sir?
caves, and we're using farming tools and the dating of farming tools.
Okay, so-
in Nazareth. Nazareth was a
So
1st
scientific
century Palestinian
measurements
town.
to determine your farming tools date are good for you, but not good enough to tell you that the Earth is billions
Oh,
of
I
years
can
old.
promise you, sir, I didn't do the study. I'm not an archaeologist.
Okay, so
Archaeologists did that in Nazareth in Palestine.
okay, so one person did that because from what I understand is that there's such a huge gap in when that could have been that it's more likely than not probable that that town did not exist when Jesus was born.
Sir, that's an old argument that's been debunked by archaeology,
No, sir, it
okay?
has not been.
Yes, it has.
No, it hasn't.
Just give me a little bit of evidence to back that up.
Okay,
I
I'll
gave you
pull it
the
up on
evidence that
Google right
Nazareth
now.
did exist as a 1st
Pull
century
up some
town.
evidence on Google right now.
All right, we're going to go on to somebody else now, okay?
Go ahead,
You go ahead and pull up your evidence on Google.
If you were to say that God is truth when 10 minutes ago you said that no one can prove that God is real, would you technically be saying that God is not truth?
No. What I am saying is that God has given us rational minds
Okay.
to get in touch with reality, to get in touch with truth. But because of the limits of our rational minds, we have to learn to live with mystery.
Exactly.
Every scientist has to live with mystery. Every husband and wife have to live with mystery. Every roommate has to learn to live with mystery. Just because I can't have total knowledge and prove something does not mean that I can't know something. I can know some science. I can know some math. I can know my wife. Not totally, partially. I can know myself. Not totally, partially. So you see, I as a thinking human being, sir, do not base my life on proof. It's intellectually naive to think that I can prove anything. I can't prove anything. That doesn't mean I jettison my mind and stop thinking. Instead, I base my life on evidence. What does the evidence point to? Does that make any sense?
Yes. However, you say that we have to live in mystery. And so I am someone who I don't know the answer. You know, I don't believe in really anything because I'm not at a point in my life yet where I feel that it's necessary for me to believe in that. However, yesterday when I said, or not yesterday, 2 days ago I was
Right.
sitting right there.
I
and
remember.
I said, I don't believe in anything and I'm fine with that. You said that I was not fine with that. And there might be a few people here. I said, I
bet.
don't believe in anything, I'm fine with that. And you said, no, you're not.
Okay. Thanks for coming back and asking for clarification. This guy can say to me, Cliff, I don't believe in anything. I'm going to have to look him in the face and say, sir, by the way you dress, by the way you articulate, by the fact that you are a student here at this fine university, you obviously are a highly motivated person. Well, when I say you have to live for something, that's all I'm saying. Something motivates you. In other words, you think something is worth doing this for. You think something is worth paying some money to get a degree from here. You see, you're not agnostic, meaning by that, you're not just sitting here saying, I don't know, Anything goes. No, no, no. You're dressing a certain way. You're articulating a certain way. You either lie or tell the truth. You either steal or respect the property of somebody else. You either study and try and get a degree, or you don't and you flunk out. But you've got motive. Now, all you got to do to figure out what you live for is follow the trail of your motives. What really makes you tick? That's the answer to the question, what are you living for?
So, would you say that I am a liar if I say that I live for my earthly being and for my own happiness and the happiness of others?
No! I say thank you for telling me.
Okay.
All right, man? Yeah. Okay, but now I got a question for you. See, the question is, now I think you're really thinking, because you're analyzing yourself.
Yeah.
You're engaged in self-reflection. You're saying, okay, what do I really live for? Well, I guess I live for, say it again?
Myself, my earthly presence, and my own happiness and the happiness of others.
Okay, good. Now, the question is, what is the evidence that living for myself and living for the happiness of myself and others is the ultimate purpose of life? I mean, why have you arrived at giving so much credence to living for myself and living for my happiness and to make others happy? What's the evidence?
Well, being happy makes me happy, and being sad makes me sad.
Right.
And so obviously, happiness makes me feel better than sadness, so I choose to be happy.
Okay, good. Yeah, it makes total sense. But wait, I want to press you a little more. I'm like you. Okay, I want to be happy. All right? But you see, the question is, who are we going to trust to tell us what true happiness is? Who are we going to trust to tell us the pathway to true happiness?
I trust myself.
Okay, good. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Gosh, you're awesome. All right, now wait a second. But now what's the question? What's the evidence? See, because I'm not the same way like you, man.
Yeah.
I want to be happy, and I'm saying, okay, now, who am I going to trust ultimately to make Cliff happy? And maybe it's going to be Cliff. Maybe I'm going to trust myself ultimately. But as I look at my life, to be honest with you, I'm a mixed up kid. All right? I mean, at times I do that which is good, and then other times I do that which is evil. At times I bring unhappiness into people's lives, and I regret that. And at other times I do bring happiness into other people's lives, especially when I'm selfless and serve them and love them. So I'm a mixed up kid. But as I look at Jesus Christ, he lived the type of life that in my best moments I've tried to live, but I have failed. I have failed in trying to live the type of life that Christ lived. So all of a sudden the evidence is maybe I should trust Christ instead of myself ultimately. Obviously I have to trust myself to some extent. I got to trust myself to think, to live, to feed myself and all. But the evidence is that Jesus Christ is more reliable than I am. That's why I'm convinced it's more wise for me to put my faith in Christ than for me to put my faith in myself.
One thing that was brought up to me a while ago that made the Bible seem a little bit illogical is based on what I've heard, I'm not sure if this is true, but that the Earth is 6,000 years old. And I'm asking you, I'm going to base my question off of your answer.
You bet.
What does the Bible say about the age of the Earth?
Great question. The reason that's such a great question is it applies to so many of the issues we were just finished talking about.
Right.
Which is, what does the Bible say and how to interpret it? Sir, never once does the Bible say that the world is 6,000 years old. Never once. But some well-meaning people who've read the Bible took the genealogies out of Genesis, strung those genealogies together, and said, the Bible teaches the world is about 6,000 years old. The problem with that is the Hebrew word for son of, which is ben, can mean descendant of. Don't take that from me. Just go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, where we read, Jesus was the son of David, who was the son of Abraham. Obviously, every Jew knew full well that Jesus was not literally the son of David, who was not literally the son of Abraham. Thousands of years separated.
In the literature, it says that he is a descendant of David.
Yeah, in the Bible, Jesus says, I am the door. And you're a narrow-minded fundamentalist if you think that Jesus is saying, I am two pieces of plywood slapped together when I say I am the door. Hopefully at Texas State they teach you to respect metaphor, allegory, simile.
Okay, so how do you determine which is which in the Bible if it can be all open for interpretation and can all be allegory?
Well,
Can
how do
Jesus
they
Christ not be
teach you
a
to
myth
do that at this
or
fine
allegory?
university? How do they teach you to interpret any book? What laws, rules do you use to interpret any book?
If it says anything in there about unicorns or anything that's just not physically possible or exists, to not believe it.
That's what they
Resurrection,
teach.
people coming back from the
That's
dead,
how they teach
says
you to
not believe
interpret a
that.
book here at Texas State?
That would be yeah. If somebody died and resurrected, they would say probably not true. That's how they would interpret
If there are insane claims with almost zero evidence to back them up, then it's probably just something somebody made up.
What are you talking about?
Well, I can promise you, I was never taught to interpret
Exactly,
any book
God
that
totally
way.
exists.
The way you interpret a book, be it a science textbook, a play, a poem, didactic moral teaching, the epic poetry of Homer, is doing two things. First of all, you respect literary style, and you learn to distinguish between historical narrative, eyewitness reportage, scientific literature, poetry, the plays of William Shakespeare, because those authors are employing different literary genre,
So is the Bible
style.
historic or is it poetry?
Second point, you always read in context before you interpret. You never rip one line out of Macbeth and say, this is Shakespeare's worldview. Instead, you read in context. Now, if that's the way you're going to interpret every book here at Texas State, which I hope you do, respect literary style, read in context, simply do the same with the Bible. Respect literary style. There are many different literary styles in the Bible. There's poetry, like the book of Psalms. There's apocalyptic literature in Ezekiel, Daniel, and the book of Revelation. There's historical narrative in Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. There's didactic teaching, the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. So there are many different literary styles in the Bible, not simply one. Okay, have I answered your excellent question? But before you go on now, thank you. Thank you for your intellectual integrity. I know we don't agree, and that's beautiful, all right? But the way you treat me and the way you speak is incredibly fine, so thank you. So keep going.
So, the general answer, to sum it up, would be that the Bible doesn't specifically state that there is a date that the world was created, but
Precisely.
rather somebody's perception of what they read and
Exactly.
then related to scientific information.
Thank you for listening and taking me seriously enough to listen. Thank you, sir. Correct.
So, my question to you would be,
Right?
also being ignorant of the Bible, is there any place that does state a beginning with a time mark, or is there nothing that really states that? I guess.
Anywhere in the Bible?
Right, so is there anywhere that states a beginning with a date, or is it just there was a beginning?
Right, not the beginning of the earth. No. But regarding time and history, yes, the Gospels are clearly historical narrative. Why? Because the literary style. Let me read a passage to you that'll show you what I mean. Luke chapter 3.
So you just said we can't pick one thing out of it, pull it out, and say this is the encompassing view. You're just about to do that. You just said we can't do that, and you're about to do that.
Luke writes, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene. Well, who gives a rip? I sure don't about who's tetrarch or whatever. But when you go back and study the Roman records, what you will find out is Luke was hitting it out of the ballpark in terms of historical accuracy. These were the tetrarchs at the time. These were the governors. These were the people who were in power in the Roman government. So clearly, Luke is setting Christ in an historical context. He's not saying, once upon a time, in the land of Nod, Jesus, John, and James took a boat ride on the island of Atlantis.
This is
No,
what the beginning of the book says.
not at all. No part of the Bible says that once upon a time. That type of literature is nowhere in here. Thank you for raising that issue.
Finite crime can be punished by eternal suffering.
Okay, good.
That's not judgment. That's not balance.
All right. right. Now, there are at least two good reasons from my perspective that there's a hell. First of all, if I choose to live my life separate from God, God is not going to force me against my will to spend eternity with him.
But he will force you to go to hell.
No.
He is.
Hell is my choice.
He's giving you two choices. So that is a forced situation, sir. No, it's a forced
Sir, you have two choices.
Love me.
Either to have a relationship with me or not. All right?
Or go
That is
my
the
own
nature
way.
of reality. And you're right. You have a choice either to have a relationship with God or not to have a relationship with God. And if you choose to have a relationship with God, you'll spend eternity relating to him in heaven.
No, I
If you
think
choose
can't
not to have a relationship with God, he respects your
He doesn't
free will,
exist.
he respects your dignity, and he will honor that choice, and you'll spend eternity separate from him. Okay, so the first reason for hell is God respects your free will. The second reason for hell is because God is good, evil ultimately loses. Just think about your worldview. If there is no God, if there is no day of judgment, if there is no heaven or no hell, evil wins.
Unless good wins, right?
Evil wins.
Unless good wins, though. Good could win.
No.
If
So
it-
the
if it just plays
Holocaust took
out.
place.
Do what?
The Holocaust took place. Jews were
and
slaughtered.
charity takes place.
Yeah.
And there's been less crime in the past centuries, especially since we're becoming a more secular world. There's been less crime, and it's been a whole lot less. It's just the media coverage makes it looks like it's more profound. But there's been less crime and less poverty since the beginning of time, and that's a fact. You can look that up.
Okay, so I want you African Americans here to remember that in spite of the white folk enslaving your great grandparents, we progressed.
Yes, I hope
That's
so.
hollow, sir. The fact is, African Americans were enslaved. They were slaughtered.
A century
All right.
and a half ago.
And if there is no God, evil wins.
Well, if
They're
there was a
dead
God,
and gone.
Why did it happen?
But you see, the point is, there's a God who's going to judge us
God
all.
promoted slavery.
and-
They had a reason on your book to have slavery. And you're
No,
going to sit
sir.
here and try to toss something on me so people in here that might be of an ethnicity have a problem with me, sir? That is not nice. It's shallow.
Sir, you have stepped
It's
forward and
disgusting.
dug the hole in front of yourself, and you're
No,
stepping into your
that
hole
was
all the time.
disgusting.
Yeah,
to
you're
use
being.
that.
At times you make a
I
logical
serve our
sense,
country,
and
and
other
you're going
times
to toss that. I serve everybody here.
Good.
All I'm doing
Well,
right now
thank
is
you for
telling you
serving
about,
our
I don't
country.
want to shake your hand right now.
I'm just thanking you for serving our
No.
country.
Not right now. Not in the middle of when I'm saying something. You don't get to do that.
Oh, you just interrupt me every time I start
Yes,
talking.
I do.
Uh-huh.
Only because what you're saying is
All right.
because what you're saying is crap.
And what you're saying is truth?
And dude, I apologize for how he treated us right now. How he used ethnicity and slavery against me in an
It
argument.
was the
right now.
truth. Did
So
you hear her just say it? It was the truth.
Just because.
You just have a hard time facing truth, sir, that's all. And I'm challenging you intellectually, start facing the truth. And the truth is, African Americans were enslaved and slaughtered in this country.
And it was promoted
if
by
there
your
is
Bible.
no God,
It was supported by your Bible.
that's irrelevant. It is not supported by the Bible.
Yes, it is.
No, it is
Slaves
not.
obey your masters.
And Philemon, accept your runaway slave Onesimus, no longer as a slave, accept him back as a brother, Paul
Yes.
writes in the letter
And
of
if a slave
Philemon.
is beaten and he survives after 2 days, the owner should not be punished.
And that's for the theocracy of Israel. And we talked about that in this excellent question this woman
Did you
raised.
ever change the law so that was not the case?
Yeah, that
Jesus
law
came
in
to
the
uphold
Old
the law, not
Testament,
to abolish
in
it.
Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those laws for the nation of Israel do not apply today. And the New Testament clearly articulates
So
that.
how do you go around Jesus upholding the law and not abolishing it? He says that himself. I came to uphold the law, not to abolish it.
Very simple. He upholds the moral law. He did not uphold the Jewish theocratic law for Gentiles to have to obey.
He doesn't specify that. He says, I came to uphold the law. He doesn't specify moral or the Jewish law. So the interpretation is now open for us to debate about on who is right about it.
Fine.
Okay, so it could go either way. There's
No, it
nothing
can't
to
go either
determine.
way. The
Yes,
question
it
is,
can.
what does the evidence point to?
The evidence points to there not being any evidence to support any of our claims right here.
Well, just
So
read
it has
Acts
to be
chapter
interpreted as
15.
all law.
It's the first council of the Christian church. It's dealing with that very question. Just read the book of Galatians. It's dealing with that very question. Do Gentiles have to keep the Jewish law and be circumcised? And obviously, the followers of Christ said no.
But
Gentile
that's the
Christians do
followers of
not
Christ.
need
It's
to be
not Christ.
circumcised
Christ
in order to
upholds all
follow
the law.
Jesus.
You've been lying.
No, I have not been
You've
lying.
been lying.
And that's another example of you being incredibly judgmental.
No, I'm just telling the truth.
No, you're not telling the truth. I've not lied once out here that I think.
Statements.
When did I lie?
The entire time you said Jesus was real.
Yeah, that's right. I've said
And that
Jesus is
and
real.
that he's the Son of God.
I said he's the
It's a
Son of
lie.
God. That's right.
That's a lie.
No, it's not a lie. It's the absolute
not
truth.
true.
Of course it's true.
No, it's not.
Sure it is. I talked to him this morning.
I read a different book that nobody's ever read before. I know from a different God that it says that your God specifically in there, Jesus.
Yeah, so what?
So
So
that's
Muhammad
true.
taught that
That's-
Jesus is not God.
Jesus
But
is
as you
not.
study the Quran, you'll find out that Muhammad is not a very reliable source of
And to
information
find out
about
in the Quran
Jesus.
that Jesus is a prophet.
Yeah, but Muhammad lived how many years after Christ?
I don't know. Who cares?
Well, obviously, if you're going to trust a guy who never met Jesus, who lived 500 years after
Jesus
Christ,
is represented.
if you're
from-
going to trust him to be your primary source of information about Jesus, you're making a mistake.
Not Muhammad talking about Jesus. It's the Quran prior to Muhammad talking about Jesus.
Oh, really? There was no Quran prior to Muhammad,
There
sir?
is. No,
No.
no. Talking about the historical documents that back up the Quran, not the Quran. Yes, there are. There are.
The hadith is written by Muhammad himself.
Okay, I need to do more work on the Quran. but-
Please do.
You're right. No, you're right. I'll
And
do more.
stop calling people names out here like liar when you don't know what you're talking about. Come on,
I'm
man.
talking about the Bible.
Fine. If you reject the Bible's reliability, I respect that. You have every right to do that.
And
But
if
don't
I
come out here
reject it,
calling people liar when you know very well. Nobody's lying out here that I know of yet.
It's very small things that you've been talking about that you've been very, I would say, dishonest about.
All right.
Now, I can't rewind the tape that he has, but we can go back in there and talk about it later if you'd like.
I have
to.
said clearly the evidence of the way Jesus lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead points to Christ being reliable. I've said repeatedly, don't take that from me. Don't believe in Jesus because I do. Repeatedly, over and over again, and I'll say it again. Go back and read the Gospels for yourself, the source documents, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and ask yourself, does the historical evidence point to Christ being a quack? If it does, reject him. But if the historical evidence points to Christ being the truth, you'd be very wise
Why
to
not
put
read
your
the
faith
entire
in
Bible?
it.
Why not just the entire Bible? Why not tell people to read the entire Bible overall to know who the God is?
Because the
and who
odds
Christ
of me
is?
getting any one of you to read the entire Bible are pretty low. If you have the time to
Shouldn't be
read
if
the
it's that
entire
important.
Bible, please read the entire Bible. But I'd encourage you to start, if you don't have too much time,
I
with
have
Matthew,
4
Mark,
times.
Luke, and John. Read the 4 Gospels, because that's where you'll find out about Jesus.
So you. No, I have.
Now, Jesus loves you. He wants you to spend eternity with him in heaven. Wouldn't that be a wise decision to trust in him? Why?
Because he created a paradigm where I have to choose in between him or hell, and I don't want to do either one of those.
Okay.
So that's not wise to trust somebody that's giving you 2 options when there could be a better option out there.
Okay, what's the better option?
I do whatever I want to do.
And where does that lead to?
Whatever I want to do.
No, sir. There will come a time when you're not going to want to die. And you will have to die.
I agree with that.
Okay. Good. I'm glad we can agree on that. Now, Jesus said that there's life after death, and he said he's the way to heaven, to life after death.
Yeah.
Why would you want to look a gift horse in the face like that and say, I'm not interested?
Because it's probably a Trojan horse.
Okay, so if Jesus is a Trojan horse, who's the reliable one?
I am.
You are. Okay, now, as I look at myself, I realize, although at times I'm reliable, at other times I'm not.
And Jesus is the same way. Pray to Jesus to help you, and then pray again, and sometimes he helps you, and sometimes he doesn't. Right? Because it's
No,
a
no.
coincidence.
No. False. If you misdefine prayer as the way to hit the little red button to get the cosmic bellboy
Ask
to
and you
fetch
shall
my
receive.
bags, then you're going to be keenly disappointed in prayer. Because guess what? Prayer is not the way to manipulate God to get an A on an exam you've not studied for. Prayer is not the way to get a Mercedes at the end of your driveway when you go
Exactly, it
home
doesn't
tonight. It's not what prayer is. The same way that if I say to him, I want to be your friend, you want to be my friend? And he says, yes, Cliff, I'd like to be your friend. And I say, fine, no problem, just $1,000 right now. And if you give me $1,000, then I'll be your friend. That's incredibly manipulative and dishonest of me. If I want to establish a friendship with this gentleman, I got to allow him to open up and reveal to me what he wants to. And I got to open up and reveal to him who I am, and then we build a friendship. But if I have the audacity to say to him, you know, I don't think you really want to be my friend unless you give me $1,000 right now. I am a crass manipulator. I'm a deceiver. I'm a liar. I'm a hypocrite. And if I approach God that way, hey God, unless you give me what I pray for, I'm not going to believe in you. What a con artist I am. What a hypocrite I am.
No,
It's
that's
sad.
not what I'm saying.
Well, what are you saying then
Oh, I'm
about
saying
prayer?
I'm praying. I'm talking about nights as a child praying and crying because I had doubt. and it was never taken away. Now, having that happen, okay, and going through that process and kind of coming to the realization and studying the Bible for myself after that had not happened is where I came to this part right here where it doesn't work. There's morality in the Bible that is outdated, that you uphold, that is destructive to our society and to our culture.
And one of my good buddies just lost, his wife just miscarried, and their little baby boy was stillborn. Okay? That doesn't mean God killed the baby.
Yeah, he aborted it.
And it doesn't, no, God didn't abort the baby.
It sounds like it did. Today.
No.
Could have kept it alive.
God created a world filled with human beings who he gave a precious gift of life. Genesis chapter 3 records how we human beings flipped God off and told God, get out. Because he respects our free will, he took a step back. But the consequences were chaotic. Genetic breakdown, destruction, disease, death, rampant. God loves you and me so much that he sent his son Christ to bleed and die on a cross to provide the way through death and destruction to eternal life. Grab hold of that help.
It makes no sense.
What doesn't make sense about it?
That an eternal, all-powerful, all-loving being would create such turmoil just to help you out. Like that. Like, why would he make you go through all that if he is all-loving? Would you have done that?
It is absolutely impossible.
Would you have done that?
It is absolutely impossible for me, for God to create a human being with free will
Would you have done that?
and then tell him how
that?
he's going to live.
Would you have done that?
Somebody else have a question.